machaji na manyonyo. Ngoja uone collapse ya real estate in Kenya vibaya sana. Unajua Interpol, CIA, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, banking hizo fraud za US washaanza kuongea na the Kenyan authorities kuhusu hizo properties from proceeds of fraud zenye ziko Kenya jo. Na inavujua kitu moja, unajua in Kenya ulikuwa unapata land ilikuwa inabaiwa 10 times the average price. So hii iko inafanya vitu zi shoot up vingori sana jo. Unaona? So sasa hizo properties zita stall kuendelea kujengwa kwa sababu do itakuwa hakuna. Do za kujenga hizo vitu zitakuwa hakuna do. So property unapata imefika katikati imekuwa hapo. Ngoja uone Kenya kutakuwa na ghost towns pale hivyo Kilimani, wapi Eastleigh nini kutakuwa na ghost towns jo. Lakini pia hiyo jue ita affect economy vibaya sana kwa sababu ya jobs. Unajua hiyo shughuli ilikuwa imeandika watu wangapi wera wewe? Watu wanaenda kwa ukiona wera mtu wangu vibaya sana jo. Lakini sasa unapata kwa an average buyer mwenye uko na kubuy land na vitu zimekuwa expensive. In the next few years maybe unaweza afford kwenda kubuy kitu. So hii maybe ni win lose kwa kila mtu jo. Another thing, ule Msomalia alibado akaenda kuinvest Mogadishu Somalia, huyu ako sawa. Juu ya aguswi nani atamgusa? USA itaendea shughuli yao ati Somalia Mogadishu. Lakini watakuja Kenya kwa sababu the Kenyan authorities watacooperate na the American authorities. Unacheki. Wewe jua tu ni mbaya mtu wangu, juu usitake jua.
That money in Minnesota that they scammed, you know where it went to? They brought up city blocks in Eastleigh, Nairobi, Kenya. Check this out.
Somali people, you must tell us where you're getting this money. And I can tell you, every street in Eastleigh right now has more than 10 buildings under construction. You will see these buildings covered with nets and under construction and not yet complete, or at least recently completed. Every street. And remember, Eastleigh has 12 streets. First street, second street, all the way to 12. And every street has like 10 high-rise apartments under construction or recently finished construction. Somali people have money. These people have money. I don't know what they do, how they do it. I think they're trying to make Eastleigh a city of its own in Nairobi, man.
He said buildings, like blocks of high-rise buildings being constructed. And that video is from 2023. Oh, where did all the money come from? Well, that money came from Minnesota, buddy. That's where all the money went, to buy up city blocks of high-rise apartments and business complexes. You see, they making that into a little Somalia right there in Kenya. That's where majority of the money went.
All right, now the FBI are now targeting Kenyan properties worth 39 billion Kenya shillings, which are suspected to be proceeds of what you will call the Minnesota scam. Of course, you understand that there was a scam going on in Minnesota, and we'll be giving you more stories on that very soon as they unfold. Stay tuned.
Kuna watu ni kama mambo karibu na wachemkia huku Kenya, and these are the individuals who are used to transfer the funds that were stolen from the state of Minnesota. Inasemekana about 39 billion Kenya shillings. And inasemekana a huge part of that ilitumwa to Kenya. And now US agents are currently following the trail of this money. And inasemekana soon some people could be arrested, property could be recovered. And wanasema all that glitters is not gold. And it's really interesting how this is going to affect Kenya's property market in 2026. Because inasemekana some of this property imekuwa ikiuzwa at some crazy prices, zinaweza kuwa zenye zilijengwa na proceeds of this fraud, and so zinaweza kuwa seized, and that would be a hard reset for Kenya's property market.
And there's no way KRA did not know. KRA walikuwa wanajua nini inaendelea, because KRA has always been giving them a through pass. Unaenda kununua kitu unaambiwa withdraw. Madam, why am I withdrawing? Mbona nitalipa na M-Pesa? Why do I have to pay in cash? And they've been doing it for a very, very long time. Na watu na nyamazanga tu, nobody cares. Juzi kuna malimi nilienda nikaona pia Wakenya mwanzo kushikwa na hiyo tabia, anaanza kuambia watu withdraw. Alafu KRA, they have the audacity kuja kutuambia hapa every year ati hawajamanage ku collect enough taxes. Yet we know where they can get all that taxes. Iko tu area moja. Wamenyamaza tu. Kuna siku fulani hata itaniacha kwendanga hizo area. Ni kwa time nilikuwa nanunua vitu fulani mingi sana. Na nikaenda hiyo place. I had been going to that shop for a very long time. As in that guy was a good guy. Alikuwa jamaa fiti kwa anafanyanga na bei poa. Na hiyo siku nilikuwa nanunua goods worth about 100,000 Kenya shillings. Na sijui tulisumbuana nini. Alafu akaniambia hapa naenda wetoa pesa pale ni nini kila kitu. And tukasumbuliana tu story fulani. Na nikachukua hizo goods kama nimekasirika vibaya sana, nikasema sitairudi Eastleigh tena. Because I'm done with these guys. So why is Gary was complaining if they know where they can get money? They have all this information but they don't want to do anything about it. Wanakuja kutusumbua the rest of us wenye tunalipa taxes. Ai. Kwanza kama wewe ni mtu uko formally employed, ile tax yako ndio inashikilia watu 3.8 million peke yake ndio wameshikilia tax burden ya Kenya mzima. Ai.
This is for entertainment purposes only, so family. Am I the only one who's a little disturbed at the possibility that the divided states could actually own half of Nairobi? Like, have you guys been following the Minnesota tax heist? Because the thing is, okay, when I was in Nairobi recently, I was going around just the city, doing things, fun times. And I was just like shocked at the number of Somalis I saw around. And no hate, no shade for Somalis, you know what I mean? And like, I went to Arboretum a couple of times. It would be like 10 Kenyans and like 200 Somali women or whatever. And maybe 20 Somali guys. But I was just like, what's going on? And guys are like, no, a lot of people have moved into apartments nowadays, so this is one of the only parks, etc., etc. Guys were just, and I was discussing it with Nairobians. And then I went to BBM and Eastleigh and stuff, and I was like, what? It was insane, like that mall and just the infrastructure. If you were in Eastleigh 5 years ago and you went today, you'd be like, what? And then I remembered those stories we used to hear back in the day. If you ever had a rela who lived in South B or South C and owned their house, and how the Somalis came and they would offer them like 60, 70 million for a house that was maybe at the most worth like maybe 15 million. And so like guys were always talking about like how they're coming after our neighborhoods. There's even a Kapasta. This one that did the Nene, what's his name? Kula. Sakula had also warned Kenyans about how, people need to keep their homes and there's going to be an invasion. You know how our pastors are all the Muslim conspiracy, what. Turns out that all this stuff was probably bought with, a lot of it, let's say like that, allegedly, was bought with taxpayers or, I don't know, U.S. citizens' funds. And now the divided states is coming back for their property, and apparently they're going to start seizing some of these properties in South B, South C, Eastleigh, Diani, most of Nairobi, that were built or were bought with these funds. So, as in, if you see this thing clearly, I return to the question that I started with, family. What if Trump's America actually owns half of Nairobi?
Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Wake up, Africa.
Hiyo 39 billion Kenya shillings ndio ilitumika ku upgrade Eastleigh. Na kama ujaenda Eastleigh of late, by the way, unaweza shangaa sana. Unafaa kwenda from street 1 hadi street 12 uone hizo mabuilding huko. Either kuna building inaisha ama kuna building karibu kuisha. Na hizo ndio FBI wanakujia, by the way. Na ukiona pia vile wal diversify hiyo pesa yao, I'm telling you, enda uangalie the new petrol stations. Hizo kubwa kubwa ni zao. Those big restaurants, hizo malls kubwa kubwa walitengeneza na pesa gani? Hizo electronic business yenye wameshikilia yote, manguo ndo natuimportia. That was money well spent. Banyi wa Kenya mlikuwa mmepatiwa pressure, you always saying, wako na ujamaa, they have community, they know how to build each other. Kumbe, after kuomba 5 times a day, ni maskama the rest of the time. Wana scam US na Canada bana. Niwetu Canada bado hawaja release documentary yao. Mwacha kupewa pressure bwana. Wametengeneza apartments kila mahali, wali upgrade Pangani, wame upgrade South B, South C, wametengeneza apartment in Kileleshwa, Kilimani. Mmepewa pressure. Ona sasa mko kwa news. Ona Kenya kwa news sasa. Mwacha kupewa pressure.
Soon and very soon, the American government and the FBI will be landing in Kenya. Yes, and they will be coming to arrest some Somalis who frauded the American government of 250 billion US dollars. You understand? So these Somalis kumbe wanakuwaga fraudsters. Unaona, wamejenga manyumba refu, wamejenga ploti zingine mingi, kumbe hii pesa inakuwaga pesa ya kuoshwa ama pesa ya kuibwa. That is what is now turning out. Walidanganya the government of America huko Minnesota that wanataka pesa ya kuenda kusaidia watu. Kumbe hizi pesa waliziturn na waka-invest into real estate. So let us wait for the American government and the FBI to come and collect these crooks and take them back to where? To America, because I know they'll be charged in America.
Believe me when I say this, don't envy every rich man or woman that you come across, because most of it is ill-gotten wealth. Let's have a look at this cover of the Daily Nation, for example, and I quote, 39 billion scam. US agents target Kenyan properties. On to the subheader. Payback since 2022. Kenya has featured in courts in the US state of Minnesota during a 39 billion corruption trial. Masterminds of the COVID-era scandal invested part of the cash stolen from the US taxpayers in Kenya, buying high-end apartments and luxury resorts. Now, with their conviction, US authorities are on the trail of the ill-gotten wealth. And you can see an individual called Abdiaziz Farah, Abdi Majid Noor, Mukhtar Sharif, Hayat Noor, and Mohammed Ismail. Then right next to Mohammed Ismail, there's another text which reads, Karibu Palms Resort in Diani, which convict Liban Alishire bought using part of his stolen 315 million. He agreed to surrender the property. So let me explain how this scam works. Picture this. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when schools were closed and fear was everywhere, the US government released emergency funds meant for hungry children. The program was called Feeding Our Future. It was meant to be a simple, noble cause where the US government gave out meals to low-income kids because they could no longer eat at school under shutdown. Now here's where the plot thickens. Some goons from Minnesota came up with a non-profit organization called Feeding Our Future, and guess what? The state of Minnesota trusted those goons to oversee millions of dollars from the federal child nutrition program. And instead of distributing food, the Feeding Our Future non-profit started approving fake food sites which claimed to be feeding thousands of children every day. In some sites, they claimed to be serving 3,000 meals, 5,000 meals, or even 10,000 meals daily. But in reality, there were no children and there was no food. It was all just a big scam. Now in comes the second question. Where did the money go to? First up, right here in Nairobi, Kenya, a high-rise apartment building was purchased, specifically in the South Sea neighborhood near Nairobi National Park. According to the DOJ, Department of Justice, that is, another defendant bought an aircraft in Nairobi using the same funds. You go to Diani, another one of these shifty individuals allegedly wired $216,000 towards purchasing Karibu Palms Resort in Diani Beach, just right next to the Indian Ocean. Still on the US Department of Justice report, some of the funds were also used to buy land in Mandera town along the border with Somalia and Ethiopia. Again, let me reiterate, don't envy wealthy men and women. For some of them, you just never know how they came about those funds. These are people who are going to scam taxpayers abroad to then come and wash the money in this country. You have heard of South Sea, you have heard of Diani, you've heard of Mandera town. Others are even buying planes and they're chartering them to us. These are some of the things which need to be recouped by the US and Kenyan government, sold, and then we share the spoils. Sababu hii pesa hatuwezi rudishia wa America much as ni yao. The crime was committed on both countries. The funds were stolen in America, invested in Kenya. We will seize them, sell them, tukatane katikati nusu-nusu. Because that is what they would have done in America anyway. I don't think they'd send it all the way back to Kenya if at all. And this is what's going on in this country, left, right, center. Scammers si wale pekee wako Minnesota. Even this housing program, kuna watu wanakulia illegally. Overpricing cement, overpricing chuma ya D10, D12, D8, overpricing BRT. Everything is through the roof for the sake of somebody getting kickbacks and stealing from the nation. As we deal with these people who stole from America, we must also ask ourselves, who are these people who are currently stealing from this republic? Because pia wale wanaiba Kenya ni exchange program. Hawa wanaiba huko wanaleta hapa. Wetu wanaiba hapa wanapeleka Dubai na kwingine. So we must also start looking into that. But anywho guys, let's see what Kenyans on X had to say about this, and I quote. Brian Okello said, from Minnesota to Minnesota. Well said, Brian. Godfrey Mugambi said, was just wondering how a Somali president could come open a big mall in Eastleigh in the company of Duale, who has become very arrogant of late. He has kept very silent on this matter. Serikali ya majambazi ikiongozwa na jambazi. Combo Steve said, the US government itabidi ianze kushindana na boma yangu kuuza nyumba. The Kenyan property market is saturated with overpriced houses. Information Technology said, USA does not play with taxpayer funds. They have the reach and means to claw back their money. Sir Isaac Newton said, in the same way that funds meant for development in Mandera, Wajir, Isiolo finds its way to Eastleigh. Ironically, Eastleigh was never mentioned in this report, but that's an interesting tweet right there. Gatonga Kairu said, 39 billion is just a drop in the ocean literally. The fraud must be quite extensive. If the US authorities dig a little deeper, the entire of South B, C and Parklands will suddenly become empty shells. Selector Physicus said, wakifukuzwa US watakuja Kenya. Please be vigilant. Nchi yetu isiwe another Nigeria, Sudan ama Lebanon.